If you're in an area where timber is valued, where land is valued, extra land, where lakes are valued, then I would say engage a local realtor who has experience in that area, and they'll definitely be able to give you the best valuation as opposed to just a home in a neighborhood, a home in a city. But yeah, there are specific areas where all those things do add value to your property.
Yeah, and I would also say if you are not trying to sell, one of the big things that unfortunately has plagued our family, but I also feel like plagues a lot of families, but specific to our household, minority families, is a lot of minority families, their parents, if they purchased homes in areas that are now gentrified, right? So like my dad's from the Midwest, he's from Milwaukee, Detroit. My mom is from Memphis. Like they grew up and they bought houses in areas of Milwaukee where now that's a really valuable property. But we don't have that property because when my grandfather passed, we sold it, right? And the one thing they're not making more of is land. It's a finite resource. So I am always, when I come across people who have family property, oh, my mother's getting older, she has a house, we don't know what to do with it. If you can find any way to keep that house and get the value out of it without selling, I would explore it. So if my family had land that had timber on it and multiple residences, I would be looking at the zoning to see what could be done on that property. I would be trying to figure out any way I could to hold on to the property but get some money out of it, so that you don't lose it. There's a person across the street from me who has been in his house for 35 years. Look at that plot of land. It's 5-6 minutes from downtown Nashville, and you can probably fit 3 or 4 houses on that plot of land. And one day he's like, oh, I'm gonna, eventually I'm just gonna sell this place and move out to the suburbs. And to me, I'm like, I hope you don't. I hope you find a way, even if you build something else on this property, to retain some piece of ownership on it so that you can continue to make money on it over the years.
That was good. What are some of the common mistakes you see people make when they're in the middle of buying the home process? And then what are those trying to sell a home? Did I say it right, Ms. Donna?
Yeah, you're fine. Common mistakes. I'll do common mistakes for a buyer. And I'd say one of the things that they do during the process is that they don't realize that once they have been pre-approved for financing, then they need to be very careful about making any adjustments in their finances during the time between the contract and closing. And that would be something as simple as start opening a new bank account, withdrawing a large amount of money for something, even depositing a large amount of money that you receive for any reason. You're going to have to account for all of that. You definitely don't want to go buy a car. You definitely don't want to go finance a house full of furniture, any kind of additional financing that you didn't have when you were pre-approved. You just don't want to do. You sit still, you get through the process, and then you reassess and add those things. But just most importantly, if you do receive funds in any of your accounts during the time that from being approved, you're going to have to show some accountability for where those funds come from. Please don't try to change jobs. Definitely don't try to go out and work on your own in the middle of the process. Everything you're working and your finances just need to be stable during that period of time. Sellers? Brenton, you want to get on that? Or?
I mean, to me, with the seller, the first thing is everybody thinks that their house is the most valuable house on the block, right? So, like whenever I'm talking to a client who's about to sell their home, the first thing they say is, "Oh, well, my house, the house down the street sold for 400,000, and we had better finishes. So I thought we could get for like that. That's not a thing, right? So, like the way that you view your house is not always the way that someone else is going to view your house." But to me, when I look at a mistake that I think a lot of sellers make, and we can actually get into this a little down the line, because my advice when you're going from a home you already own to the next home is I would actually say the home that they're looking for after they sell is too similar. right? It's only a monumental difference from the house that they're already in. And to me, when it comes to the finances of it, we can get into it a little bit why I think that they should like have a true level up is because of what it does to the equity of your home. Here's what I mean by that. When you buy a home as a first-time home buyer, it's probably going to cost you the least amount it will ever cost you to buy a home because you can probably find the first-time home buyer program, 3.5% down or some small amount down. After you've gotten that program, you now have to come with at least 10%, if not 20, moving forward. So you have to get a decent amount from the sale to get the next property. So when you go from one property to one that's very similar, you're going to want to leave that home too, right? It's only incrementally different from the house that you're already in. Right now, you're depending on getting more and more from the sale to generate the 10 or 20% you need on the next property. So like, there's just not that much of a difference when you're buying a house. Like, oh, my last house sold for 300. This one is worth 375. Okay, well, if you know you're not going to stay there for more than 5 or 6 years, are you going to get enough from that sale to get a house that's substantially different, or are you just going to be like hoping that this home increases in value? And what if it doesn't? Now you're stuck in a home that you don't like, but you can't get enough from the sale of that home to get anything different.
I like this. Oh,
Go on.
no, go ahead, Ms. Donna. You probably have something more to offer.
I want to add something that's not really financial, but it is. Take care of your homes. If you have a home and you want to get as much value out of it when you sell it, then you need to do all of your regular maintenance on your home. Usually by the time you get ready to sell it, if you haven't taken care of it, you can't afford the deferred maintenance that's required. And so if you want to get as much out of your home, take care of the little things when they happen, take care, if you can, of the big things when they happen. And I guarantee you will reap the benefits when you get ready to sell your home.
See, I needed that, Jewel, before I started talking. Brenton, you talked about the first time home buyer experience. So a lot of social workers, I won't put it all on them, but people with lower income moving into buying their first home, how can debt affect them buying their first home? How can, I guess, salary changes? Because this whole conference is boosting your income to live the life that you want to live. So, how can salary changes help you buy a home, and how can debt affect you buying a home? Two-part question.
So, as crazy as this sounds, I actually think that when it comes to the things that actually impact families financially or individuals financially, banks can be too lenient, or lenders can be too lenient when it comes to how much home they'll let people purchase. So there's a concept called debt to income ratio that they use to figure out how much home you can purchase, right? They total up all your debts, they compare it to your income, and then they say, oh, this person can afford X amount of house. Well, the first thing is they're considering your income before taxes, before employee benefits. So it's not a real number, right? Like if you divide my salary by 12, that's not actually what I take home. Like when taxes come out, when employee benefits come out, it's a much lower number. So that's the first way. There's other things that they don't consider. Like if you have children, they're not counting like daycare costs in the same way that they would count like a car payment, because that's not a debt, but it's a very, very real expense, right? So to me, one of the biggest mistakes I would see, and I wouldn't even frame it as a mistake, one of the things I would encourage people to do is don't just go off of what they tell you can afford. Put the actual payment into your budget for a month or two and see if you could cover it, right? Like if they tell you that you can afford a $2,000 mortgage, you try and do that before you buy a house for 2 or 3 months and see if it's actually sustainable. If it is, then go forward. But you don't want to just assume, hey, they did not know that I have a child in daycare. Now I have a second child that's going in daycare. They did not know that my mom, not my mom, like so might need $300 or $400 a month that I have to come up with to help them these types of things. Like those are things that are like very real in people's lives that are not factored into that conversation. Student loans. A lot of social workers have student loans. And the way that they consider student loans may be a lesser impact than what is truly felt in your monthly budget. So I would encourage people, whatever you're looking for in terms of a mortgage, build that into your budget for a couple of months to see if you can swing it so that you don't end up house poor. Because I have been house poor. It is a miserable, miserable feeling.
I agree.
House poor. This is your second time saying it, and I want people to understand what that means.
House poor means that you technically are in a house, but you really can't afford to do anything financially but pay the mortgage, right? You can't afford the maintenance on the house. You can't afford to pay down any other debts. You definitely can't afford to save. You have overextended yourself. Here's a perfect example. When she talked about, for the bigger things, for maintenance, if you can keep up with them, try to do so. If you're in a house and if the HVAC unit goes out, you just flat out can't afford to get another one. That's an example of house poor, right? If you have a wall and somebody stumbles and like puts an elbow through your wall, that's a very specific example that it's happening. If someone puts an elbow in your wall, it is going to be 3 months before you can fix it. You're house poor, right? You have to be able to afford the mortgage while also being able to address the other areas of your financial life.
Thank you for that. Ms. Anna, did you have anything to add to the last question before we got into house poor?
I know Brenton probably phrased it a different way, but I always tell my clients, don't let a lender tell you how much you can pay for a house. You need to determine that before you ever get to the lender. They can tell you how much you qualify for, but that doesn't mean that's how much you can actually pay for the house.
Great. Our next question is, do you think of a home as an investment? Yes, the answer is yes, based off what we've been talking about, but you can explain more. And do people who want to be wealthy have to own real estate?
I'll let the realtor take that one first and then I'll follow up.
I consider a home an investment for two reasons. Yes, they go up in value. Mm-hmm. And so, it is a tool for investment, I should say, because they definitely usually appreciate in value. Right. Brenton would have to answer whether you can be wealthy. I have my opinions on that, but since I'm not a financial advisor, I would definitely not. I'm not gonna weigh in on that one. How about that?
I'll add a wrinkle to the home as an investment. If it's the home that you live in, it is an investment, but it may not be one that benefits you, depending on how you look at that house. So, like, if you take my parents as an example, their home is an investment, but if they never plan to leave that home, it's not really one that benefits them. It's one that benefits the people that they leave it to, right? Because they're not selling it. Right. And I think that's an important distinction because people can look at a home as the only thing that they have to do financially. And that's not true. You have to continue to save. You have to continue to invest because unless you plan to sell that home, you are not going to be the one that benefits from that investment. If it's a home that's an investment property, for sure, it's an investment. But I have seen many people who have investment properties that they think are working well for them, and they're really just duds. It's costing them more than they're making. And you have to make sure that you understand some of the things that you use to assess whether it's working for you or not. As to the question of whether someone can be wealthy without real estate, absolutely. You do not have to own a home to be wealthy. You can save and invest yourself even greater wealth, depending on how disciplined you are and how much you save. I think what real estate does is it gives you one of the most time-tested ways to appreciate in value, right? The stock market will go up, but you have to have the discipline to save and invest. There are a lot of people out there who have stumbled their way into wealth by just being able to afford the property, and then over time the property appreciates, right? So Like you can be wealthy both ways, but real estate has been a way that people have been able to do it in some cases by just being lucky and buying the right house, not knowing what it would turn into 20 years down the line.
Okay. And then we have, it's been in news that interest rates are going down, and it's still been hard for people to find homes. The recent changes to how realtors are paid, all of that we discussed. What are some things you think we might see in real estate market over the next year or so?
Well, if the interest rates continue to go down, it may stimulate our market a little bit. It's kind of stagnant right now for two reasons. The interest rates have been high, so the buyers can't really get a lot of home, because of the high interest rates. But secondly, you have sellers that are sitting in homes and they may be thinking of relocating, moving up in home, but they can't afford to because again, they would have to qualify for those with those high interest rates, or they have such low interest rates on the homes that they're living in until it just really doesn't make economical sense, financial sense to sell and then go into a home and pay a rate that's 2-3% higher than the ones that they're living in. So I think that if the interest rates are forecasted to continue to come down. And I think if they do as forecasted, then it may stimulate and our market may get a little busy. I don't know if it'll ever be the frenzy that we had during COVID, but well, ever in the immediate future have that kind of frenzy. But I think it will get better for sellers and buyers.
So with that said, what are some things people need to have in place before they purchase a home?
To me, an understanding, even before we get to the money side, an understanding of how they being a lender will determine what you can afford, which is different than what you should, try to afford. So for example, I work with a lot of like entrepreneurs and they'll go into, they're going to qualify for all this home without an idea of how a lender looks at independent contracted income, which is very different than how they measure a person who's on salary, right? They make it extremely difficult or more difficult for an entrepreneur or an independent contractor to qualify for a home than a person who's on salary. So you want to have an idea of like what holes are they going to try to poke in your finances before you go into the application process. And then when you're starting to look for a home, I want someone again to be able to afford the down payment, the closing costs, as my mother said, the appraisals, all of the things that come with it. And now, because of the rule change, I would also want you to be able to afford a couple of months of expenses in case something happens and your realtor's commissions. I know that can sound really depressing because it's like it's adding all of these things that you have to have before you look. But again, you want to be able to get in that home and enjoy the home. You don't want to be able to get in that home and again, just because you have it, you're not really in a position to benefit from it. It just becomes a source of stress. So down payment, closing costs, appraisals, a couple months expenses, and potentially your realtor's commissions. If you have all those things in store, you'll be able to get in that home, have some furniture instead of some lawn chairs, and actually enjoy it.
So I would add to that just knowledge of the whole home buying process. I think that if you're a first time home buyer, and sometimes if you haven't bought a home for a while, it would serve you well to look for a first time home buyers class. You don't have to be a time home buyer to go to one of the classes. So I think that would be very important. And I also think that when you even think about owning a home anytime in the near future, it would do you well to find a reputable lender that can also give you more knowledge. They can look at your financial situation now, and you can kind of discuss where you're trying to get, what kind of home you're trying to get, and they can kind of help chart your that process. I have several clients, or have had several clients, who have spent 2-3 years to prepare to buy their first home when they first started, they just weren't in the place where they could afford it. But just having knowledge of the process and staying in contact with a lender has made a difference, and they've successfully closed on homes.
Okay. Our wrapping up question would be, I know you work with young professionals and families, and what unique advice would you give for them to upgrade their home?
So this kind of alludes to what I was talking about earlier, where I'm like, I know it seems odd and it may seem like a contradiction to the first time home buying, but there's a unique subset of people who are in a place in their career where they're on like a real upward trajectory, right? So there may be people where your salary is kind of slotted and it's baked in, right? I'm a school teacher. This is what I get paid now. This is what I'm probably going to get paid, just a little inflation on it 10 years from now. In that case, you have to be really disciplined with the type of home you purchase to make sure that you can really, really afford it. But there's like this small group of people that I deal with, especially in my practice where I work with a lot of people who are like right in their peak earning years, where they're about to really explode in income. And for that small group of people, there are times when I tell them to think bigger when they're going from one house to the next. Because the tendency is when you are making something now, even if you know you're going to be making way more in the future, when you're going from one house to the next, say, oh, I don't want to pay more than $200 more than I'm paying for my current mortgage. And you're just going to get the exact same house that you have on the other side of town. So it's like I'm trying to get an upgrade, but I'm anchoring in my mind what I'm paying now. And that means that I'm not going to have the stomach to go for a true upgrade. So there are some families that I work with where I'll say, hey, I know that it seems scary, but you need to get in your head that you're going to be paying double what you're paying now. Because that's going to be the type of home that's a true upgrade that you can grow into as your income continues to grow. So it's like if you can afford it now, even if you don't want to afford it, if you can afford it now, 10 years from now, when you're making way more money, that payment is not going to be as big of a deal, and you will be in a house that you actually enjoy. But what I see people doing too frequently is they try to say, I'm gonna get a little bit better, and then they get paid more. They say, I'm gonna get a little bit better, and I get paid more. But unfortunately, they're just in a cycle where they're buying the same type of house over and over again in this incremental process. And I would much rather know now, hey, if I'm 35 years old, I'm paying a little more than I'm wanting to pay for my house right now, but at least my housing costs are fixed and I'm in a place where I can stay for the next 10, 15 years. So when I'm 45 years old and I'm making way more money, man, I'll be so glad that I fixed my housing costs 10 years ago. So that's something I would encourage people to think about. If you know you're doing all the things to really, really increase your income and you're trying to say, hey, I'm looking for a home, is that a home that you can stay in for 10 years? Because if you can only stay there for 3 or 4, do you really want to go through this process we're talking about of all the things you have to get together to purchase a home just to know you're going to be moving on 3 or 4 years down the line?
I don't have anything to add to that financial advice, but I will still emphasize protect the asset that you do have. If you have a home, take care of it. It will sustain its value, it will increase in value. You will not lose value when you get ready to sell it because your home is discounted because it's in a state of disrepair. So take care of your home.
Well, great. I think we've had